Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, mole mole wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so happy that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Our guest today is Rajani LaRocca. She is here to share some great wisdom for all authors and aspiring authors. We're calling this episode, It Starts With an Emotion. Before we invite Rajani into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at @readingwithyourkids on Instagram, at JedleyMagic on Twitter. Be sure to check out our Reading With Your Kids page on YouTube. And please be sure to keep your eyes open coming in January, Drawing With Your Kids. We're going to have a great Drawing With Your Kids YouTube channel. We have illustrators from all over the world teaching us how to draw characters from their books. I'm having so much fun re-interviewing these illustrators, doing the illustrations myself. You get to see how bad of an artist I am. It's really a lot of fun, and you and your kids are going to have such a great, as we say here in Boston, you're going to have such a wicked great time. So please be sure, and also please be sure to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the contact button at the top of the page to let us know what we're doing well, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, joining us right now for our authors program, she's been a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast a number of times. She is a fantastic writer. Please welcome to the show, Rajani LaRocca. Hey, Rajani, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. How are you?
I'm really well. I'm really happy that you're taking time to speak to our authors that are listening. We have so many authors who listen to the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We wanted to create a show where they could get some insight from some authors like yourself who have written a number of books and also been honored. You recently received the Newbury Medal, or the Newbury Honor, for your book, Red, White, and Whole.
Yes! It's so exciting!
Yeah,
it's
congratulations.
Thank you.
So I guess, one of the things I wanted to start with talking to you, all of your books, well, at least all the books that we've chatted about, are autobiographical in some ways. They're not biographies or autobiographies, but they're based on experiences that you've had in different parts of your life. I guess, how do you choose to, how do you write in that way with, it's fiction, but it's based on fact, and at some point I'll figure out an English question to ask you, but why don't we start there?
Well, I tell kids when I talk to them about my books that the stories are fiction, but the emotions are real. So that is where I usually start. Usually the inspiration for a book comes from an emotional place. So, and then I take it and I try and make it as specific as it can be. Now, sometimes that means that it really is based on something that happened to me. So, for example, in Red, White, and Whole, it is set in 1983 about a 13-year-old girl who feels torn between the worlds of her Indian immigrant parents and her, friends at school and kind of American pop culture. And, I lived that life, right? I was 13 in 1983. And so many of the feelings that she had about like, wow, I feel like one person on the weekdays at school with all my friends, and I feel like a completely different person on the weekends at home with my family and community. And who am I? And do I really belong to either of these groups? Those feelings were all real feelings that I experienced. And the other thing that was important to me is that all of these things occurred in the setting of being loved, like loving all the people around you, right? Loving your parents and loving your community and also loving your friends at school and loving kind of that community, and yet feeling conflicted and feeling divided. And so I used a lot of those emotions and put that into that book. And but the specific situations that happened in the book were different from what happened to me, because I didn't set out to write an autobiography. I wanted to tell a story about this character. And as I was writing the book, the character, Reha, became more and more her own person and different from me and distinct from me. And so she had things happen in her life that were very different than what happened to me. So I thought, but the seed of it was about real emotion that I felt as a kid. Similarly, my picture book, Where Three Oceans Meet, which came out in August 21, is about a girl who travels with her mom and a grandmother from Bangalore all the way to the southern tip of India to a place called Kanyakumari, where they say three oceans meet. And that is the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean. And that was based on a trip that I actually took with my family from Bangalore all the way to Kanyakumari. But the things that this character, Sejal, and her mom and grandma do are a little different from the things that I did with my family. And my trip was not only with my grandmother and mother, it was also with some other relatives. But I simplified it and changed the story because that's what I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about the connection between mothers and daughters and granddaughter and grandmother. And I wanted to write about how we often, when we go on a trip, like a road trip, we think about the big important sites we're going to see. But the real thing that we remember, and what I remember as an adult about that childhood trip, were the little moments that I spent with the people that I love. And so some of those little moments, those exact little moments, made it into the story. But the rest of it is all fiction.
I think that that's a really important insight, that you start with an emotion. That when you sit down, pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, your intent is to share an emotion with your audience.
Yeah. And emotions are universal, right? The specifics of when you feel them or why you feel them may be different for each of us, but the emotions are universal. And we have all felt this way. We have all felt like, oh my goodness, do I actually belong in this group of people? I don't know. Or I want to be like everybody else, but I also want to be unique and I want to be myself, right? We all feel that as we're growing up, and oftentimes as adults too. Mm-hmm. And the feeling of, oh my goodness, there are people that I love so much and I don't get to see them that often. And like, how do we remain connected even when we're apart? That's a universal emotion as well. So, but the specifics of the story, are the thing that kind of grabs you and makes you believe for while you're reading the story that these people are real people. So that's what that's the other tip I have for writers, is that the universal is in the specific. Make your characters seem like real people with their own foibles and their own characteristics. And then those things that those characters feel will feel universal to the people who are reading it.
Do you ever worry, as you're writing these specifics to try to help the reader connect with these different characters, and you're writing from your own experiences, do you ever worry that, I'm going to get too close and Uncle Harry is going to recognize himself in this character and I don't want him to get mad at me?
Not really, because I don't usually take real people and like lift them right into the story. I usually do make kind of composite characters, so that it's not exactly one person. But I'm telling you, sometimes I use actual quotes from people, but I don't use quotes that are like bad quotes. So I use like fun, interesting, funny, or kind of heartwarming quotes that people have actually said in my life and put them into my stories sometimes.
Yeah, you were sharing in one of the other interviews we did that when your grandmother came to visit you in suburban Louisville and was in the house with the air conditioning and all of that, what was it she said she couldn't hear?
She couldn't hear a sparrow chirp from inside the house.
That would make that person real. If I was reading the book and I came across that, I'm like, yeah, I see her. I've met that person before.
Yeah. And that's a very specific way of looking at the world, right? It's so interesting. Because she was used to being in a large Indian city that was like noisy at all times, and the windows were always open and the doors were always open. So like all the outside noises were always in the house. So in our house, where it was the summertime and it was hot and we had the air conditioning on and the windows were all closed and the doors were all closed and it's insulated, you couldn't hear that much from inside the house. And that was like the point, right? Where we lived, right? Mm-hmm. But it was very different for her. And then the other, this is in the picture book, I'll Go and Come Back. The other piece that I lifted straight from my own life and that is really about my grandmother is that there is a scene where the little girl realizes that maybe the grandmother is cheating at this game. It's called Palanguri, which is kind of like Mancala, and you have to count and then, pick up, shell. We were playing with shells, and that is absolutely what happened. I remember I was a little older and I realized, wait a minute, she like miscounted, but she kept miscounting in order to kind of keep getting ahead in the game. And I just remembered, I didn't say anything to her. I looked across the room at my cousin and he just nodded at me. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so in the story, I think I say, no, sometimes she didn't count right. She liked to win. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was such a fun characteristic about my grandmother. I thought that was just great. So instead of letting me win, she did the exact opposite because she really wanted to win. And I was like, that's kind of awesome.
Now, do you sit down and just kind of riff and write down all these different memories and have like a little notebook so that when you're writing a book like I'll Go and Come Back, you can just, what's the specific I can remember? Oh, yeah, she used to cheat at the game.
I don't usually do that. Usually what happens is I get an idea, at least for picture books, this is the way it works for me. I get an idea and I will write down the idea. But if I'm really excited about the idea, I will just draft a story right there. And from the beginning, for I'll Go and Come Back, I knew this was a mirror story about a girl who felt lonely and homesick in India, and then the grandmother comes to visit her and she feels lonely and homesick, and they both help each other. So I knew that, so I kind of wrote parallel things about both those experiences, how, each of those places had things that were unfamiliar and weird to the people visiting. And so I will just draft it. And then, I will go through however long it takes to like wrestle that draft into what I'm really trying to say. And, with picture books, when I was first writing picture books, it took me a long time sometimes to figure out what I was really trying to say. And that's okay. So, I'll Go and Come Back was one of the first picture books I ever wrote. It took me a few years and like maybe 50 drafts to figure out, this is actually the heart of what I'm trying to say. As I became a more experienced writer, it takes me fewer drafts and fewer years. Thank goodness. Sometimes it doesn't take me years at all. Which is nice. So all I can say is that experience of, whittling down and revising a story to concentrate what it is you're really trying to say is, it's good. It doesn't matter how long it takes. And it is helpful. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. The same thing is true of novels, only they're just more words. Mm-hmm. And you have to find, you have to take a lot longer to draft them and longer to revise them, but that's okay. Red, White, and Whole, because it is a novel, in verse, so it is a series of poems. I approached this book very differently from how I approached my prose novels, in that I wrote the poems in random order. And like you said, Jed, I made a list of topics that I wanted to cover, like things that I thought might happen in this book. And then I would just make the list, and then I would just sit down and write a poem or two or three or five. And it was only in revision that I figured out what the order was that I was going to put them in.
That's really fascinating. There's a lot here that I want to. I just had the experience of helping my niece apply for colleges, and it seemed like, there's this Common App that was supposed to work for every college except for 20 of the colleges that she really wanted to apply to. And
20!
Yeah,
oh my goodness, that's a lot. Wow.
So we were working together, and there was a lot of emotion that to tell about herself, but she wasn't sure about how much of that she wanted to share. And it was a real struggle kind of finding ways of sharing that in a way that she felt comfortable. Yeah. Do you ever approach, is that ever an issue for you? It's, either at the beginning or as you're writing, it's like, this is an emotion and it's getting really, I don't know if I want to share this on a page.
So, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, but I think because my books are fiction, it's easier sometimes to change something so it doesn't feel like it's exactly about me. It's really hard when you're writing personal essays like for colleges because basically the point of it is to say, this is me, this is my experience, and that can be really rough. But I think there is a way to be vulnerable in your writing and have it not be too much. With Where Three Oceans Meet, I'm telling you, for the first couple of years, whenever I read that story aloud, I would tear up. The ending of that story is poignant, and it just made me think of my relatives that I don't get to see that often. And I would have a hard, and then, at first I was like, oh my goodness, that's embarrassing. But I was like, you know what? There's where's the shame in that? That's okay. It means that you're expressing something that's really true. And, similarly, near the end of Red, White, and Whole, I had this experience where I, was visiting a class that had almost finished doing it as a read aloud, and they had me come in and read passages near the end of the book. And I was like, oh my goodness, I wrote this. How am I feeling so emotional about this? And it was I was unprepared for that. But you know what? That's okay. I think one of the most beautiful things we can do in writing is to be vulnerable and to expose something about ourselves that is true and just have it out there in the world. And so even though this is a fictional story, so much of it is about my actual heart, that I was just like, okay, you know what? This is just the way it is, and that's okay. And I think the good part about it is that when you express something that means that much to you, that you feel so deeply about, I think it shows on the page. And I think that people notice that and they feel it too. And so, you know what? Wear it proudly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier that you start with the emotion and wanting to get the emotion and share that emotion. And sometimes it takes you years to figure out what it is you're trying to say by sharing that emotion. We've had over 1,300 episodes of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and so many authors have come on, and they have not experienced your level of success. But they come on saying, I wanted to write a book about bullying. I wanted to write a book about, and they seem to have started in the opposite place. Instead of sitting down and sharing an emotion of a time in middle school where they felt left out, where they felt excluded, where somebody was making fun of them, and sharing that to eventually get to a point. They started with the point, I want to talk to kids that bullying is bad. Do you think that they have it backwards? Do you think they might have more success if they kind of take your approach? Or is there a way to sit down and say, I want to write a book about bullying, and then find an emotion to start with?
Yeah, I think you can approach writing from all kinds of perspectives. And I think it's fine to say, I want to write a book about bullying and like why we shouldn't tolerate it kind of thing. But what I would say is that in order to access that story, in order for the reader to get pulled into that story, I think you have to write some real stuff, real emotional stuff. So what I would say is that well, then can you draw upon, or can you even just make up based on some other time when you felt like the world was not treating you fairly, right? Can you channel that into the situation in your story? What did it really feel like? And, I start with really basic stuff, like what does it feel like in your body, right? Do you break out in a sweat? Does your heart start racing? Are you sweat? Are other parts of you sweaty? Does your face turn red? Are you able to talk, or do you talk too much? All these things. And then put that into your character, and your character does not have to be you. Especially if you're writing fiction, it definitely doesn't have to be you, but think about how that character would feel in that particular time. And then how do they express those feelings to the outside world? So, it's what's interesting to me. And there are all kinds of layers. They don't have to be what they seem like on the surface. Sometimes the person who is doing the bullying, feels like a victim in other places, right? So maybe there's all of that going on, which is also very interesting. So what I try to do is I think about a character and I think about, what is the situation they're in? What do they think about it? What is their immediate reaction to it? How do they act upon that? And then what is the real deep underlying thing that is going on that they may or may not be aware of at the moment? And then go from there.
Yeah. Emotions are complicated.
Yes.
And as you said, there's a lot of layers there. Now, how does an author express that without just saying, she was really complicated and she felt lousy and there's a lot going on in her life? That wouldn't make for a great story, I don't think, or a great segment of a story.
Right. No, you have to go beyond those kind of, you have to go beyond the generic, and you have to make it very, very specific. So it does not have to be specific to your life, but it has to be specific to that character's life. So for example, say, the common lunch table scene where the person is looking for a place to eat lunch in middle school, and the person that they were just talking to 5 minutes ago, turns their back on them or doesn't look at them or doesn't save a seat for them. And this person is feeling left out. So what is going on in that person's head that they see at the surface, right? They may say, oh my goodness, I can't believe that she didn't save a seat for me. I thought we were becoming friends. And then what does she do? So one character, one person might just find a way onto that table and shove and make a seat, right? Whereas another person might just say, oh, I can't possibly do that, and kind of curl up into a ball and go to the corner or go eat in the stairwell, right? Mm-hmm. Those are two different reactions. Whatever it is your character decides to do, you have to figure out the backstory for why that would happen. Maybe, they live in a family where they're a bunch of kids and she's used to just shoving away and being I better eat now, otherwise I'm never going to eat, right? Or maybe she just feels she's she doesn't know how to approach people and is very shy. And so she just kind of turns away and goes somewhere else. And then, so there's, whatever it is that you decide to have your character do, there has to be a reason that makes sense to them that they do it. And then maybe underlying all that, why do they feel this way? That's something you have to figure out as you write your story or before you write your story. Mm-hmm. I like to think about, especially for novels, I like to think about, what a character wants at the beginning of the story. What is it that they want, that they think that, they're actively pursuing something, right? Mm-hmm. And then what is it that they really need? And this is something that they don't know about themselves at the beginning of the story. And that by the end of the story, at least they should know this, even if they don't get it. Mm.
Great advice. So much. I feel we can talk for hours, but one thing I do want to talk to you about is you're a very prolific writer. you've had a number of books published. I think there were 2 or 3 last year in 2021, and a brand new book coming out here in the beginning of 2022. And you're also a physician.
Yes.
Where do you find time?
Okay, I had 6 books come out last year in 2021, which is a little bit nuts, but that was not intended. That just is kind of the way it ended up being. Because 2 of those books were sold in 2018, 2 in 2019, and 2 in 2020, and they all came out in 2021. So publishing is just kind of strange that way. But, so how do I don't know, how do I do that? I think the simple answer is that when you love something, you do it. You find time to do it. So, when my kids were younger and they were in school, I would write whenever I had a few minutes. Like, I was not very fussy or super fancy about anything. I was like, oh, I'm parked in a parking lot waiting for them to come out of school. I will just write a little bit, or I will dictate into my phone, or, hey, they're at a piano lesson and I'm sitting here in the lobby and I will just pull out my laptop and I will write a little bit. I have written early in the morning. I have written late at night. And now they're older and they're in college. So like, basically my husband and I, after we clean up after dinner, like he's working and I'm working. And so we are writing. So that is how I think basically, like, as a working mom, I was never too precious about when I could write. I had to write when I could write. Otherwise it was never going to get done. So, yeah. And then the other thing is that I do think that, my kind of medical training and kind of my scientific brain, I like deadlines. I like setting goals. And so, like, even if it's something as small as I know I have a critique group meeting on such and such a day, I want to have something ready to show people that day. Those little goals definitely helped me. When I was pre-agent, and pre-publishing deal, when I would be attending a conference and I knew I was going to get a professional critique there, that was like another goal for me to like get things ready for. Nowadays, basically, the hardest, like, you just have to know yourself as a writer. So for me, the hardest thing for me to do is to draft a novel because, novels are longer, they're more involved, and I have to turn off my inner editor and be like, don't worry if it's any good right now. Of course it's not good. Like, that's okay. So I found that first thing in the morning is my golden novel drafting time. And like, if I try and draft something later in the afternoon or forget the end of the day, my brain is so fried with email that I can't even do that. So I will save time and I will put it on my calendar. You're going to draft, and that's it. And you don't check email and you don't look at social media, and you just do whatever you can do then. So that is helpful to me, but revising and writing picture books, I feel like I can do it anytime. So I just kind of do those in the other times when I can. Yeah. And then nowadays, the other thing that's, makes things easier and harder is that you have deadlines. Like, you have a contract that says your next novel is due on this date. And it's like, okay, I have to turn it in. So I need to get this done. So that is helpful as well.
Yeah. One last thing to the author that's out there and, has read your books and is hearing these great tips and this great advice and is saying to herself or himself, yeah, well, I'm never going to get to her level, so I shouldn't even bother trying.
Oh, you know what? The difference between those of us who are published and those of us who are not is that we just kept going. I mean, that is all I can say, because I have felt all those feelings. It is not that like those feelings go away. There were times when I almost gave up. I remember specifically, like, in 2017, I was in my kitchen with my children and I said, I don't know why I'm bothering doing this. I should just focus on my actual job instead of this pipe dream. And my 2 teenage kids said to me, Mom, we love your stories and we think you should keep going. And, we think that other people want to read your stories too. And when your own kids give you back the advice that you once gave them, you have to listen to them. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, fine. I guess I have to keep going. And within a few months, I signed with my agent, and then everything changed from there. And that is not to say that like there weren't like sad things, difficult things, all kinds of, hard things that happened after I signed with my agent, but at least I got one step further in the process. And so, if you care about writing and you want to write stories, then you should keep going. And it is not easy, but the things that help you are having friends. That's to me, that was the thing that like kept me going through all of it, is that I made really, really wonderful friends through writing. Like, and when you have a really good friend whose opinion you value say to you, you have to write more because I need to know what happens next. You have to keep going. So that's my advice.
Great advice. Great advice. Tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and all the wonderful things coming from your imagination.
Yes, the best place is my website, www.rajanilarocca.com, RajaniLarocca.com.
Awesome. I've had a great time speaking to Rajani LaRocca. Find an emotion and start writing about it. Hey, Rajani, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dad. This was so much fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Captain Bill Pinkney. He's done something that very few people have done. In fact, less than 100 people. Sail around the world solo. Circumnavigate the world solo. And he did it by going around Cape Horn. It's an incredible story. Bill is also the first Black man to circumnavigate the world. It's solo, and his story is just fascinating and inspiring, and you're gonna love meeting Captain Bill. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Rajani LaRocca. Please be sure to check out her website and let us know how her advice has helped your writing. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q, Skylar Strauss, Jordan Saley, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.